Hi, meet Carl. I'll show you how I made the bases for the crosses I made last week. Here, I won't show you the base. Then we'll see Carl's reaction. Carl purchased a custom-made cross about a year ago for his mother and requested that I make 4 more for him to give to people in his church. I also made 2 additional ones for another customer. Born in Otsego, New York, Carl still lives in the house he was raised in. Raised Catholic, Carl wound up going to a doctor in 2004 where he developed a relationship which eventually led him to a new church. Carl is active in the church and feels welcomed. These crosses will be Easter gifts, probably sooner than that, for pastors and their wives. As you've already seen, I sourced these pieces for the bases from a cherry tree we had felled earlier in the spring. The section of branch they were cut from is about 5 inches in diameter, and the rough cuts ranged from 3.5 to 6 inches in length. We've also seen that my expertise with video production was excellently demonstrated by the shadow of the camera tripod directly in the shot, but I digress. After getting back in the shop, I needed to cut the pieces in half on the bandsaw. Of course, there were some that needed trimming. That was when the pull saw was brought out, and the hammer and chisel were used to reduce the friction from the wet wood on the blade. Notice I said wet. After the pieces were cut in half, I drilled a hole in each of them for the woodworm screw. Once the first blank was mounted on the lathe, I roughed out a circle and shaped a tenon, which I then mounted in my small chuck. At this point, I would be remiss were I not to give a shout out to my brother-in-law. He asked whether I was going to dowel the crosses and bases together, and I replied I would turn a tenon on each base to then insert into a hole yet to be made in the bottom of the crosses proper. This turned out to be a poor decision due to the orientation of the wood fibers. The grain fibers in a dowel are lengthwise. The grain fibers in a turned tenon, other than doing an end grain turning, are side to side and are substantially weaker. It was after the first oops of the project that I decided to use dowels. Thanks, bro. As there were 6 bases to make, each step in the process was done 6 times. However, I wanted to finish the first one, so I spent some time sanding it. When the Forstner bit was introduced into the equation, I noticed that the hole in the base was larger than the Forstner bit. This meant that the head of the lathe was not in direct alignment with the tailstock. No doubt this happened when a tool dug in too much or there was some other impact, which indicates it wasn't tightened as much as it should have been. I made a change in the alignment and was happy with it. By the next day, there were very noticeable changes in the pieces. It seemed to be 8 or 9 months. After being cut down, there was still plenty of moisture in the branch. Once the pieces were cut, many more fresh surfaces were exposed to the much drier air in the shop, and boy did they warp. I waited at least another week for them to acclimate before continuing. Why things take so long?
Wrong one, dummy. Whoops. That's for the other chuck, Daddy. Here we go. There's the other chuck. What are you doing? I'll tell you what I'm doing. I'm pulling it out because I beat up the last one with the pliers. How are you going to do it? Well, I'm going to tighten that up, and I'm just going to thread this backwards. Let's see if it pulls it right out. Oh, I took this off of here. Dang it. I hope that was going to work.
Let's let the artist tell us his plan.
Okay, here we are on the crosses. Now what I did was I cut some of these 3/4 inch dowels down. Most of them I had to sand in order to get them to fit in the hole. I don't know how that works. Some holes shrank, some holes don't. So in order to make sure that they're properly positioned, because you see how these wobble? I'm going to put them, they've dried for a week or so. I'm going to put them back on the lathe and take that wobble out and redo the base. In order to glue those in, we're going to use this stuff, Devcon 2-ton epoxy. So what we're going to do is we're going to glue all of these in. Now the question is, how do we know that they're going to be straight? Well, we're going to use the lathe for that. I'll bring you over here, and here we go. So I did this before, and that's why I brought you in on it. All right, so this is a really wobbly one, okay? What we're going to do is we're going to put it on this here. We're going to open it up just a little so it doesn't fall off. Now, ways to center it. I used this originally to center it because We can center it like that. See how it moved in? And then when we expand the chuck jaws into it, we should have a pretty good grip on it. Now, next is gluing in the dowel. So we have to take this bit out. We do that by unscrewing the hand wheel. I struggled with this when I first started. I had no idea how to get this thing out of here. You got to turn it backwards past it and it pushes it off. Okay, so next we're going to use this chuck to hold this. And the way we're going to do that is with this right here. Now see how that doesn't fit? It doesn't hang in there. You got to thread it out to where it goes in solid. I think that's in there. Oh, there. That wasn't even it. See? Now it's solid. So we got that there. We're going to back this up. Thread this chuck on there. Come on, Chuck. Stand up, Chuck. There we go. And we're going to insert the dowel inside the jaws of said chuck. And now when we bring this in, that's just loose, very loose. Now when we bring this in, oh yeah, that's going to position it very well. Okay, you might ask, why don't I just use a flat chuck? I think I got to pull this out here a little more. Why don't I use a flat piece to push pressure against it? My answer to that is, sadly, that I cut these with a pull saw. Yeah, I think that's it right there. I cut these with the pull saw, and the ends aren't flat. They're not square. So, all right, so that's what we're going to do. I'm going to mix up some epoxy resin, that 2-ton epoxy, and we're going to glue those in just like that. Here we go. We'll leave that. Come over here. You guys all know what mixing epoxy resin looks like. I like to use these little cups for things. We also have trays like this. Here we go. That'll do a few. Yep, gonna mix it up. Gonna put it on. Now, this only has like a 5-minute working window. So if I get 6 of these done in 5 minutes, I'll consider myself pretty lucky. I'll have to move pretty quickly. I don't think we need a lot, just enough to hold it. It's not going to be a high stress situation. Let's bring it in, lock it down, thread it into place.
So there it is. Each one of the warped pieces would have the dowel glued in using the tailstock as a centering device. After the epoxy dried, each one was put back on the lathe using the dowel as the handle. The end goal at this point was finished pieces that had the attachment dowel 90 degrees to the base. Nobody wants a cattywampus cross. So each one was mounted and turned back on the lathe and reshaped. Here's a little footage of that process while we listen to some Blue Mood by Robert Munzinger. So there was a lot of cracking, some breakage, and lots of repairs. Each base had to be reshaped, each mortise had to be less than 5/32 of an inch deep, and all the cracks and voids needed to be filled and then of course sanded again. Then it was time to laser engrave the bases. First, a hole larger than the dowels needed to be cut in a piece of scrap thicker than the longest dowel. I chose a piece of 3/4 inch scrap plywood, drilled a 1-inch hole in it, and cut it into a rough square. All of the dowels were cut to a 1/2 inch, and each piece was engraved after setting the 1/4 inch clearance on each one. All 6 pieces were numbered and entered in the logbook as one entry. Now it was time to clean each one and seal the surface. I used denatured alcohol to clean the dust off and Mylan sanding sealer to seal them. I poured some of the sanding sealer into a small plastic cup to dip my chip brush in. This worked great until the 5th base when I went to move the plastic cup. Whoa, gotta remember not to do that again. After the sealer was dry, I hit it lightly with some fine sandpaper and then set them aside until I was ready to assemble them. Before I could drill the holes in the bottom of the crosses, I marked center on each one by drawing lines between opposite corners. I then constructed a jig for holding the crosses. A bench block was clamped to the drill stand table, and a stop block was clamped to the bench block. All 6 were drilled out, and some might think that the next step was to glue them together, right? No. The bottom of the crosses were flat and the tops of the bases were curved, so each one had to have material removed from the bottom. In order to achieve this, I put a conical bit in the drill press and pushed the pieces against the slow spinning bit until enough material was removed from each one. You should not repeat this activity if there are safer options available to you. Finally, it was time to glue them up. Now the dowels are a nominal 3/4 and the holes in the crosses are a full 3/4, so the best option was a 2-part epoxy. That'll fill a void. In order to use a yellow glue like Titebond, the pieces have to fit tightly together, and that simply was not the case with these. I wasn't sure if there was enough, so I went rather sparingly on the first couple of glue ups, but there turned out to be plenty. All of them are firmly attached. Gloss spray lacquer was applied in multiple coats. Let's see Carl's reaction.
Wow. Yeah, I like that.
Well, there it is. Thanks for watching. I appreciate it. Here's something you might like to watch, and we'll see you next time. Bye.